All right, very happy to be welcoming Doug Laney here on his very first appearance on Speaking of Data. Very happy to have you here, Doug. How are you today?
Fine, great, Andrew. First appearance. What's taken us so long?
Well, we did try to connect a few months back, but tropical storm got in the way of that over at TDWI Orlando. So very happy that we're able to get this on the books and have you joining us today. So Doug, I would love to start with you just giving a little introduction, some background about what it is that you do, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. So I'm it's called an innovation fellow with West Monroe, and I focus on data and analytics strategy. So it's a few parts to the role. One is working with clients to help them conceive new and innovative ways to drive value from their data, based on offerings, kind of new offerings that we're developing and have developed at West Monroe to do so. And then I'm also kind of charged with continuing to speak and write, do these kinds of things to kind of help get the word out about the great things that we're doing at West Monroe.
Fantastic. Well, so we'll dive right in here. The topic of today's conversation is going to be valuing data.
Mhm.
And before we get into like some of the maybe more technical questions, could you perhaps give like just a broad understanding of what valuing data means?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways to think about value, to value really any kind of asset or resource. You can look at its intrinsic value based on whatever the kind of the key qualities are. So if you think about something like a diamond, you're looking at the cut, carats, what are the four C's, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so color and clarity, right? So
Yeah, there you go.
right, there we go. Clearly, I haven't bought a diamond in a while.
I bought one
So
recently and I forgot them. So that's it
right.
happens.
So we can look at the intrinsic characteristics of anything, which are kind of leading indicators of what its value are. But then we're also kind of concerned with different use cases and how that asset is being used. So we might want to also include what is the relevance of that asset or resource to particular use cases, right? And that may require us to develop those use cases, to start with, and then kind of map the asset to those use cases. And then there's kind of the traditional ways that valuation experts and accountants will value any kind of asset by looking at its cost. What is the cost to acquire or generate that asset? What is the market value of that asset on a open arm's length marketplace, or comparables? We can look at comparables as well if there's not an active marketplace for that asset, as there isn't for some kinds of data. And then the third is its contribution to revenue or expense savings. And it gets a little tricky because for any given value, any given benefit, there are often multiple resources and labor and financials that go into creating that solution. So you kind of have to tease them apart and say, okay, what component of that overall solution or use case is related to a particular type of data. And so we've been able to model this pretty effectively for clients at West Monroe by kind of teasing apart the whole value equation to determine what is the market value or the cost basis or the contribution to revenue or ROI or net asset value of a given data asset. And I imagine your next question is, okay, why do organizations want to do this, right?
Yeah, you beat me to it. That is
Yeah.
it. So yeah, why are companies interested in measuring this?
So several different reasons. I guess we could back up a moment and remind folks that data, even though it meets the criteria of an asset, isn't considered an asset according to current accounting practices for the most part. And it's kind of odd because data is an asset is something that's owned and controlled, exchangeable for cash, generates probable future economic benefits, and the fourth one is it's separable from other assets. So data clearly meets those criteria. It's just that I don't know, arcane um, accounting regulations dating back to the Great Depression still, for whatever reason, don't allow data to be capitalized on balance sheets. So forward-leaning organizations are like, well, okay, that's stupid. It doesn't help us to understand the true value of our business or to make intelligent decisions about how we're managing or leveraging or disposing of data assets the way that we do with our other assets. And so that's one reason. Another reason is to not just to make better investments, but maybe kind of light a fire under the business to do more with that data. right? You realize that the cost basis is here and the value we're getting is maybe only a little bit higher. Well, why don't we try to increase the margin? We're always trying to increase the margin on any asset that that we have. And if you're not measuring it, then you can't manage it very well. And then I think another reason that we see is companies involved in M&A activities. At West Monroe, we were advising a lot of organizations on M&A deals and carve-outs and so forth. And as part of that, we're increasingly looking at the value of the data assets as part of that deal. Here we are in the information economy, right, or the digital age or whatever, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to ignore the value of a company's data in an M&A kind of scenario. So those are some of the reasons. We've kind of got a list of a dozen or so different reasons that that we kind of lay out for organizations. And when we get into these exercises, we ask them which of these reasons are really more important to you in terms of how we're valuing data.
Very good. So I think kind of going off of that accounting aspect that you mentioned, how can companies recognize the value of their data on their corporate balance sheet?
That's a good question. So the basic answer is you can't, right? But, and there's always a but there are some rare circumstances. Like if I acquire a database from you, right? I can, and I acquire that database outright. I could include that under other intangibles and straight line depreciate it, right? And we see some data brokers like Equifax and Experian, do that kind of thing periodically, where they purchase a database outright from someone. But that's pretty rare. And the other way that we've seen, and we're working with some clients on, is to assetize their data. So the way this works, it's a bit of accounting shenanigans, but you take your data and digital assets and move them into a separate holding company. Then you value that holding company and include the value of that holding company on the parent's balance sheet. Apparently, according to the accountants we work with, that's entirely kosher. And there may be interesting reasons to do that. One of which is because data and digital asset companies that specialize in data products, such as the key social media companies and data brokers and others, typically have a valuation that's much higher, a valuation multiple that's much higher than traditional companies. So we know that investors value data higher than other kinds of assets just by looking at the relative market values of data product companies versus traditional companies. And so it makes sense then, if we want to at least jump on part of that bandwagon, that we move our digital and data assets into a separate company, value that company, and then include the value on the parent company's data sheet. It also provides some focus. So once we do that and we move those data and digital assets into a separate holding company, you're really compelled then to start generating value from it as well, a lot more than you already have. So
yeah, that's very interesting. I think that makes a lot of sense, though. So it sounds like those are a couple ways to quantify the data's value. Is there other various ways to do that, and who would typically be involved in something like that?
Because there really are no accounting standards around it, I guess you don't really need an accountant to do it. And we're definitely taking a lead in I think in the industry and helping folks do this. And I know there are other organizations that are other consultancies that are as well. And again, there are no standards. So, but we often work with the chief financial officer to make sure that the models that we're developing or adapting, and the proxies for various inputs to that model are kind of approved by the financial organization. I guess you could come up with valuation models that are entirely inconsistent with the way that other assets are valued, but we don't think that makes a lot of sense to do that. I mean, yes, there are valuation models based on data's quality and accuracy and completeness, and we refer to that as kind of intrinsic value. And then you can sort of tie that to the performance of business processes that use that value and generate kind of an index for that. But that's not a financial valuation.
Got it.
Yeah.
So for the companies that you've worked with, then how much is their data worth, say, compared to any of their other assets?
Well, we worked with a global healthcare company recently and learned that the the net asset value of their data assets was kind of on par with other assets. And we use a pretty conservative model for that. Another company where another pharmaceutical company, we looked at we generated use cases, and we assigned each of those use cases a probability based on the likelihood that they were actually going to get implemented. Some were further along in the planning stage, others were just on the whiteboard. And so we assign them various probabilities, and when you start to aggregate the value of using a data across all of those use cases, it gets pretty significant pretty fast, in the hundreds of millions of dollars per data set. But it's just not something that a lot of organizations are really measuring. So
Interesting.
And it's a shame.
Yeah, it seems like they should be taking advantage of this. So many companies work within this kind of scope. I suppose the next question that I have for you is if something, if a company or an enterprise was interested in starting to do something like this, what would the steps be that you might recommend for them to begin, this process?
Well, the first, like you mentioned earlier, is why do you want to do this? So there are a variety of reasons why you would want to, measure the value of your data. When I wrote about the concept of infonomics years ago, there were really three main components to that, and that is measuring, monetizing, and managing your data as an actual asset. And the way that kind of all fits together is, there's the old adage that you can't manage what you don't measure, right? And so I think as a consultant, 30 years in the industry, it occurs to me that companies kind of are not so good at managing their data with the same discipline as the way they manage their other assets, because they don't measure it. They don't measure its quality, they don't measure its cost, they don't measure its contribution to benefits, they don't measure its intrinsic characteristics, its business relevancy, any of that. And so they're in a really poor position to manage that data with any efficacy, or to get the support or the budgets that they need to do data management on par with the way they manage their other physical and financial assets and so forth. So there's that. And then I think it follows that any asset that you're not managing as an asset is one that you're not going to be able to monetize as effectively as you can. And so that's becomes problematic as well. So I'm not sure I answered your question. Went on a rant there.
I think you did. I think you got the gist of it there. So I guess a final question for us here is how, if a company is interested in perhaps reaching out to you or learning more about this process, how would they do so?
Yeah, sure. You can. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. So that's a good primary way. You can reach me also at West Monroe at dlaney@westmonroe.com. That's all one word. So yeah, that'd be great. Happy to talk to folks about it, and even just kind of speak to their executive teams about the concept, what it would mean to them, how to go about it, what kinds of data assets they might want to value and why. The ways that they might want to value it, the outcomes that they're kind of expecting from that. It's not enough to just measure anything if you don't have an idea in mind of what kind of actions you're going to take based on that metric. And the same holds for any kind of scoreboard or any kind of analytics you're doing. That if you don't have some outcomes and actions in mind based on what you find from doing the analytics, you've wasted some time, and money.
Certainly. Well, so it's a very intriguing topic, and I would imagine that it's going to be trending very much in a heavier use direction here in the coming months and years. But I know you're a busy man. It's a Friday. I want to let you enjoy the rest of your day. So I do appreciate you stopping by, Doug, and I'll be reaching out to you again because I think you're a great one to have on our podcast. So thanks so much.
My pleasure. I guess we should also mention that we teach a course at TDWI on data monetization and valuation. So folks can check that out as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, we'll put that information into the description of the episode and the various ways that you can get in touch with Doug. So thanks again, Doug. I really appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Andrew. Take care. Cheers.